And welcome, everybody. I'm Doug Mashkuri, Vice President and General Manager at Govloop, and I'm thrilled to be here at the Esri Public Sector CIO Summit today, and I'm really excited to be moderating this all-star panel. Before we get going, I would just like to do a quick level set before I introduce our speakers and just talk a little bit about kind of the state of what we're facing today. It's been a difficult and trying 12 months where our professional and personal lives have been turned upside down. The rate of change, the need for resilience, and the lack of clarity of how and when things will get back to normal, whatever the new normal is a really popular topic among public sector leaders today. It's been hard to see the opportunities given the challenges that 2020 has thrown us, but our panel today is going to share some really impressive examples of GIS transformation, leadership, and lessons learned. Speaking of our panel, let me go ahead and introduce you to them. First up, we have Jennifer Lana. Jennifer is the GIS Manager of Cobb County, Georgia, which is part of Metro Atlanta. She leads an award-winning local government team with over 30 GIS professionals on staff and executive level participation. Their mission is to connect people, process, and things for a smart Cobb County using maps, apps, and location intelligence data. Welcome. Our next speaker is Mark Wheeler. Mark is the CIO of the City of Philadelphia. Mark, and also the Director of the Office of Innovation and Technology. As CIO, he's responsible for IT, innovation programs, and telecommunications for 30,000 employees and oversees an operating budget of $129 million. Under his leadership, OIT has shifted from a supportive role in city operations to a leading role in business transformation and strategic planning. Jennifer and Mark, welcome, and thanks for participating today. All right, we're gonna go quick. We have 30 minutes. We got a lot of stuff to cover here, and our audience is on the edge of their seat. So first area we're gonna talk about is priorities and planning during a time of rapid change. So as I mentioned earlier, 2020 has showed us the importance of resilient and agile leadership, but it's also important to have clear priorities and the ability to reprioritize in real time. So my first question, and we'll start with Jennifer, is can you share with us some examples of how GIS helped you manage and lead shifting priorities this year?
Sure. Well, thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it. As I've said, 2020 has been a year for all of us. We've had to kind of step back a little bit and take a picture of how we do things as the county. Of course, you always have general maintenance of data sets that you have to maintain on any kind of basis. Parcels, land use, road networks, and things like that. So, but during a time of stress, you always have to kind of step back a little bit, like I said, and innovate on the fly. And that's exactly what 2020 was. Starting from the beginning of the year through it, we had to innovate on the fly. So we had to make sure that all our staff were empowered to do the work they needed. We are very lucky in the sense of GIS lets us do that. Our staff can work at home, our staff can work in the field, and then also be safe and not exposed to things that COVID or other things that 2020 brought us. So they could do their work, and it provided consistency across the whole county for us. We were able to continue the major work, then also focus our efforts on things like economic issues during COVID, testing sites, the cases, the count, schools, our kids, resources of food. So keeping that all kind of leveled out was a lot. But the technology really helped us with that, and our staff, by giving them the power they needed to do their work, got us through.
Great, thank you for sharing that, and really thank you for your leadership. I think there's a lot to learn here. So, Mark, same question to you. When you looked at leading and shifting priorities using GIS, what are some examples that the City of Philadelphia experienced this year?
Sure. I think the chief priority that shifted for us was closing the digital divide. We had been leaders out of my department in digital literacy, but when the entire city closed, the public schools and charter schools had closed, suddenly we realized just how the disparities, especially in low income and communities of color, were impacting their ability to connect. So it was an affordability problem for us in Philadelphia. We have coaxial cable and fiber networks everywhere and good cellular coverage. But for a number of families, it was just that true connectivity. And so we pivoted, and luckily GIS, we have the very strong foundation for it within city operations. So we had the data sets we needed to evaluate like what was the impact we were dealing with, looking at the US Census American Community Survey, coming up with a benchmark of the number of families we could impact. That's what we used to sell the program. So we started in June with our conceptualizing, and by July we were crafting the implementation and operation. And underlying that was some of that analysis of who we were going to do the outreach with, how we were going to conduct that outreach, and where the targeted audiences would be located. Because we're adept at looking at that data, we also knew that there were pitfalls in it. So our team drilled down even more. We went into what's called the PUMs, or the micro level data, so we could cross-reference, direct questions in the American Community Survey with the exact age groups that were responding. So that's how we were able to come up with what we felt was a fairly accurate number. The other thing that we did with GIS that was incredibly important was use the ArcGIS Online platform and modify some very complicated extract, transform, and loading scripts that we built to pull information in from the different hospitals and hospital associations, so we could provide our Office of Emergency Management and the Health Commissioner with a real-time dashboard of what the PPE capacity, what the intensive care capacity, staffing. They could see that all in one place. We could see it across the city. And then we used that same platform and just kept repeating it when the Parks and Rec operation had to convert itself into a food delivery operation for students, because now they weren't getting up to 3 meals a day at the public schools. So we were doing food distribution and delivery. And then when we had the opportunity to work with Comcast and create what they call their live zones, where they outfit our rec centers with some Wi-Fi, we were able to create what we call a safe space access center for kids. So if home isn't safe, if there's no supervision at home, the K through 6 students can get signed up, go there, get supervision, do the remote work, and now we've got Wi-Fi and internet. We picked those Parks and Rec locations, again, based on disparity information that we have from the school district, from our Office of Children and Families, and GIS played a critical role on knowing which sites to prioritize.
That's really just, both of you with some great examples. And in the publishing and media world, we have a saying, create once, publish everywhere. And it seems very similar. You want to create something and then find multiple uses for it, but really leveraging the experience you have to create something useful and then recreate it. So thank you. Awesome examples. Part 2 of my question is about planning. So, similar to setting priorities in a challenging environment, strategic planning is another area that cannot be put on hold. We can't say, oh, we're just going to wait till this is over and we'll get to it later. So, once again, I'd love some just GIS examples of how you use GIS to manage and balance both short and long-term planning this past year while navigating a pandemic, natural disasters, social justice movements, among the many other things that your jurisdictions faced this past year and going forward. And why don't we start with you, Mark, this time?
Well, I think we're in a very good position to do strategic planning, even with the facing pandemic and civil unrest, and then election security problems that we had that diverted a number of our staff to these critical operations. Because starting in 2015, we built up a operation centrally to catalog all of our data, keep that catalog updated, and create a true governance process where individual departments would be the owners of their source data. But when they went to contribute it to us centrally for enterprise use and for public open data, we had a whole bunch of standards around that. So how it got published, the metadata had to be kept up to date. Any changes to the data would have to go through our department because it could impact applications. And then we just built the whole system off of APIs and then published our data management strategy and plan around it. So now our solution providers know how to work with it, different contractors coming in and out of the city know exactly what's expected of them in terms of application development around GIS. So we're able to pivot really quickly. So an example of that is when the restaurant shut down and we went to do reopenings after, starting in May, the streets department created a whole new permitting program to allow restaurants to grab parking spaces, to take the entire, in some cases, a lane of the road in front of the establishment, or to take vacant lots. And because we had all of that data assembled, it was up to date, the analysts and planners could evaluate places with the highest density. They could look for those vacant lots. They could look and examine what taking a road lane out of a street would do. And that's how they were able to prioritize what areas or commercial corridors could get full permits to block off streets versus just those selected issues. So that was all a GIS-based analysis. And again, we pivoted off of an existing site that vendors and solution providers were using for our 5G permitting process, just opened it up to the restaurants to make it very quick and easy. Finding themselves on a map is a lot easier than finding themselves in a PDF list. And then figuring out, like, what's the street next to me that I could possibly use to deliver food.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Jennifer, how about you?
It's a loaded question, but I'm glad you asked it. It's so important to have some kind of plan. We do have a document that we update every 3 years for our GIS strategic plan. And that includes different aspects, thinking long term, what are our hardware and software needs? And of course, a lot of this is for budget. Database needs, server needs, projects, what kind of things are on the mind of our elected officials that they're going to want to get done during the term in office. So we always have that kind of in the background that we try to follow, and we meet with departments and go through what they want and what's their goals and what their community needs. So that's always kind of sits there. But as part of that, kind of having it in the back of your head and having some of those things kind of set in place already, we know where we're going. So whenever COVID struck, and just like Mark said, elections and lots of other things this last year, we were able to pivot pretty quickly because we had those planning resources already set. We knew what we needed to get done on a regular basis to maintain what we already have and to keep our program going. So instead of having the whole team of 30 GIS folks change direction and work on some of the more important social aspects and things that we were doing with economics and COVID and businesses shutting down, we were able to kind of direct a smaller group to do that, which enabled us to continue with the plans we already had in place long-term for maintenance of our data. So I think by kind of prioritizing who did what, and also having that background in place of we already knew what direction that we wanted to head this year. We had a picture of what we were going to do. We already knew the resources needed. It allowed us to really just kind of concentrate on a few people to address, the disasters, the things that kind of get thrown at us. And we kind of do that on a regular basis. Now, don't get me wrong, 2020 threw us for a loop. It wasn't that easy. But we were able to innovate on the fly without being too stressed out about the back end and the whole system in itself, our enterprise system for GIS, suffering.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the theme I hear from both of you is, having your house in order in regular times when these things do hit, you are that much more prepared. If you're scrambling to get your house in order, it's too late. So I think, once again, just great examples of really solid leadership. All right, we're going to jump to our next thing here. Next theme is innovation and modernization, and we've all been around a while, and we hear those terms thrown around a lot. You have to have innovation, you have to have modernization. But this past year, we were faced to really have to innovate and modernize on the fly, as we've been talking about. Everything is in real time, on the fly. So once again, would love to hear just some examples, starting with you, Jennifer, first, about where did you apply some real-time modernization, innovation, and the role that GIS played in that real-time movement of innovation and modernization?
Sure. So as a county, as most of you in the audience understand, a lot of citizens, and we have a population of about 800,000 in our county, don't necessarily look to the county website or the county department for innovation per se. So we've kind of grown that, but that's still a struggle. So when it started getting out there about COVID and numbers and data, and there's so many sources and places to go, and our citizens really didn't know where to go. So we wanted them to be inspired and come to the county website for information. So as we did that, we live here. My kids go to school here. So we're invested in the community. And I think paying attention to what was going on around us led us to some of the questions that we were asking ourselves and knew that we needed as a community. My neighbors were asking me questions and how could I help them? So that really helped us to inspire and invest in certain technology and programs that maybe we didn't think about before. And during COVID, we did not want to put our staff out doing a lot of inspections or unnecessary visits or things that they didn't have to because of their own safety. And I think that's a general consensus for most everybody. Staff and citizens are important to us. We didn't want to use that. So we actually switched to a little bit more crowdsourcing. We let our citizens engage with us and help us answer some of the questions that they had. What restaurants were open? Which ones were closed? Who was doing curbside delivery? Who had delivery services? By kind of switching a mindset to our team always inputting the data and doing all the field work, we let our citizens be a part of that. And it was tremendous. They wanted to get involved. They wanted to have a voice. So for us, that was definitely a different way that we looked at things this year. Not that we haven't let our citizens, help us and input data, but this year we really took that kind of to a different level. And again, we were pretty lucky because we had all the technology, the GIS, the software ready to go. And the beautiful thing with GIS and Esri software that we've been using for a long time is that it is very user friendly. So whenever we asked for help from our citizens to answer things about businesses, even the grocery stores, where could they find toilet paper and paper towels, all the must-haves, they were very happy to tell us. And that we have a great big database that now we can do analysis on from that event and from that public input that we wouldn't have had if our staff had to go out and do it all.
Once again, I agree so much. I think that citizen engagement piece is so critical. And if you have the right infrastructure in place, citizens do want to engage. We have to make it easy for them. And in times of crisis, you see that go up. And my hope is that when we're out of crisis, that level of engagement with our citizens and making it easy for them to help build out these services, using GIS is so critical. So I love that example. We see it around my neighborhood here. The same thing is, the informal crowdsourcing. But if we had better ways to capture this data, it's an asset for the entire county.
Well, so, exactly. Especially during a pandemic, our community, some people kind of felt lost and they wanted to help. We have great citizens, but they didn't know how. And with limitations that were put on us for being outside and interacting with others, it was a really positive thing for us. And we were very lucky to be able to do that and get their support.
I love it. Thank you for that example. All right, Mark, same question to you. What's happening in the city of Philadelphia?
So at the start of 2020, I was pretty excited. We had a whole new smart city plan. We had just finished up an IT strategic plan, and there were things I was ready to implement and I was excited to do, especially in the smart city realm. And I thought that would all be blown out of the water. We had a significant budget cut that we had to plan for starting in March and April, but the innovations continued because of that basis that you pointed out, Doug, that we had this data available. So instead of worrying about enticing solution providers to work with us on pilots, we were able to say, here's this wealth of information. You don't even need to spend a lot of money and time ground truthing because we have this platform that's online you can use called Atlas. We have years of street front data from Cyclomedia, which is an Esri business partner. And if you use that information, that's going to cut some of your costs down. And then we can make the right connections to departments. So we were able to put forward at least 4 different pilots that were really all location-based in nature, that benefited the public, that had an equity lens on at least one of them. And then the great part about that is now we're really in a true co-creation process where the solution providers were able to test out with our operating departments at a community level. And then we basically have benchmarking information from the get-go using the GIS to see how well things were working. And that allowed us to progress with some AI and optical sensors on city vehicles. So we can do the road condition analysis, we can extract pavement markings, and we can even do sign inventory and now litter inventory. Litter inventory was something we had to scrap that was entirely GIS-based with survey teams. We didn't have the money to continue that on with COVID, but now we can with these optical sensors and adjusting and tweaking the AI. So those are all really exciting, innovations. And one last one I'll share is where we took like networking tools, which is how you get from point A to point B, and Esri software is great at that. We do a fair bit of that work ourselves. We applied it to non-spatial data. So we took our budget, we did a capital budget exercise with our budget director, and literally mapped out where the money flows from origin to destination. Then we could actually hook it up to a physical location if it was an investment in the community. But that moving through city operations and departments and to see that visually is pretty impressive. And it's really just we're just reusing the GIS platform. And that visualization on helping the budget department was in the IT strategic plan. So we were just able to execute on it with earnest because there was such a need from the public to understand what was happening with the budget now with these cuts, and how efficient were we going to be, and how are we still going to deliver services. So that's not going to premiere for the public until we start our public hearings and discussions this coming March and April.
Great, and I think a lesson learned I'm hearing from both of you is know the power of the technology and capabilities you have in-house already. There's probably more features that you can leverage to serve your missions. So, all right, we're moving along. We got about, I don't know, 6 minutes left, so we're going to keep going here. This is kind of our final thoughts section here. So I'd like to close with a geographic approach or a location strategic specific question. We've heard during the summit from Jack and others that GIS is much bigger than a dot on the it's really a form of foundational thinking or strategy. So, A, how does this apply to the city of Philadelphia and Cobb County? And Mark, we'll start with you on this one.
Well, I think Jennifer would say the same thing, that with government, there isn't anything that we do that doesn't touch people and location. So there's an inherent location value in everything that we do. And I think that's been part of my effort going back to when I was a geographic information officer for the city, was getting all departments to realize that there was incredible value to every piece of their data. And we would know as much about the city as anyone from the outside could come in with, with credit card information or any other type of commercially available data sets. We knew that first about what was going on a street level, with property, with permitting. We could actually analyze trends. So getting all of that in a warehouse where it can actually be accessed by non-GIS people, democratizing that data and making it available to any type of analyst, allowing them to work in their native platforms and making it very easy with RESTful APIs. I think is how we've been advancing the strategy, because it keeps coming back to leaders have questions and policies have impacts, and how do we get answers to those questions? How do we assess policies before we implement them? And we need good data to do that. And any researcher from the outside is going to do the exact same thing that we would start to do internally, which is evaluate what we have, and we can do that very quickly now with our metadata catalog and then some of the visualization tools. So I think in strategic thinking starts with knowing that you're the keeper of the best data you've got.
Wow, great. I mean, that sums it up. Jennifer, help us out on this one.
I totally agree with Mark. At a county level or any kind of municipality, everything we do has a location, from permits to inspections to street light. And especially this year, we saw one of our really cool programs on our trails really be expanded this year. With everything going on, just as everybody saw across the nation, people wanted to get outside more. They wanted to use trails. They wanted to use our systems, maybe that they hadn't looked at before. Get to the parks, go look at the rivers. So one of the things that we had in place is we have emergency location markers on our trails. And we saw calls go up almost double from 2019 to 2020. These are markers that are on our trails, just kind of like an address point. But the really great thing about GIS is that it pulls it together. We're no longer in the realm of silos. Everything has to connect. And so for us, something like trails, whenever we had our population and even more people coming to the county that were new to the county, getting out there on the trails, if something happened, we have emergency signs. That one little, it does go beyond just a point on the map. Yes, you can see the point on the map that's a sign. But on the back end, It is connecting that sign to our 911 system, connecting it to our emergency responders, connecting it on a back end to assigned inventory database in different departments. So it's things like that that really show the power of GIS, that it's not anything to kind of put in a silo. It's not, okay, this one department is going to do something here. GIS brings everything together. And again, that was just an example. We also had Hurricane Zeta move through the southern part of the US, if most of you remember, if you're in that area. And that's just another thing where it pulls together, public safety. We had over 400 downed trees. And again, we can map those all day and it looks like a point on a map, but that point on a map led to action by our teams, our inspectors. We tracked the vehicles that went to every one of those spots in our AVL system. So it's all connected. And having that kind of in place before these things happen really made us as a county and Cobb and many others just be successful. We didn't have to start jumping through hoops as soon as, the pandemic started or the hurricane was on its way. Having those things in place and having it go across departments, it was just seamless. It was very consistent and seamless, and provided our leaders a really great understanding of how things are connected when they make those decisions for the rest of the county.
Great. And Jennifer and Mark, thank you for these wonderful examples in your leadership. And I think what I hope today's panel showed to our audience today is that we have a foundation. GIS is a foundation, and it can serve so many purposes, whether it's Cobb County or the city of Philadelphia. The universal power of it is so important, it's so strategic, and especially in times of crisis, you see how quick we can react to help our citizens. And once again, I really appreciate the examples you gave today. So we have a virtual round of applause. You guys were wonderful. I appreciate it. To our audience today, thank you so much. We appreciate the hard work you do every day as public sector leaders. I hope this was helpful for you. I know I learned a lot. On behalf of the panel and Esri, I want to thank everybody for attending today.